You won't believe what happened when an entitled HOA Karen tried to stop a black family from moving into their new home. She called the cops on the father, but what she didn't expect was that his son and off-duty police officer would be the one to show up. In the moment he flashed his badge, Karen's world came crashing down. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another crazy HOA story. Now, let's get right into it. It was a sunny Saturday morning, the kind that made the whole street feel alive with the smell of freshly cut grass and the faint sound of children's laughter echoing from a nearby park. For James, a retired school principal in his early 60s, it was more than just another weekend. It was the day he finally moved into his dream home. After decades of hard work, late nights grading papers, and sacrificing his own comfort to put his students first, he was ready to enjoy the fruits of his labor. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets lined with tall oak trees that arched overhead like guardians, offering shade and a sense of peace. For James, this was supposed to be a new chapter filled with tranquility, community, and belonging. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. As the moving truck rolled into the driveway with a low rumble, the sight of men carrying boxers marked with years of memories should have been a moment of joy. James stood near the porch, watching with a smile as the movers carefully unloaded furniture, the kind he had saved for and cherished over the years. His heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just a house. It was the culmination of a lifetime of effort. Yet, trouble was already brewing. Across the street, from behind the manicured hedges and pastel-colored shutters, eyes began to watch. Curtains twitched, blinds shifted ever so slightly, and whispers started to float from one window to another. In this particular neighborhood, people noticed everything, and one person, more than anyone else, believed it was her duty to notice, judge, and control. Karen, known by everyone as the self-appointed queen of the HOA, Karen was infamous for her iron grip over the community. Her word carried weight not because it was law, but because she made life miserable for anyone who dared defy her. With her oversized sunglasses perched on her nose like armor and a clipboard never far from reach, she embodied entitlement. The moment the moving truck turned onto Maple Drive, Karen had been watching, and the second she saw James, her lips tightened into a thin line of disapproval. Without hesitation, she stormed across the street, her sandals slapping against the pavement, arms folded tightly across her chest as if she was bracing herself for battle. There was no welcome to the neighborhood, no polite introduction. Instead, her words shot out like bullets. "You don't belong here," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning air. "This is a private community, and I haven't approved your move in." James blinked, taken aback by the hostility. He had heard stories about difficult neighbors before, but he had hoped his warm smile and calm demeanor would bridge any gap. Still, he wasn't one to be intimidated easily. Years of working as a principal had taught him patience, the art of standing firm while dealing with difficult personalities. He adjusted his glasses and replied evenly, "Ma'am, I signed the papers, paid the dues, and I have every right to be here." But Karen wasn't listening. She wasn't interested in contracts, signatures, or legalities. In her mind, she was the gatekeeper of Maple Drive, and James had crossed the line without her blessing. She marched in front of the moving truck, planting herself firmly as if her presence alone could halt the process. "Stop unloading right now," she barked at the movers, waving her arms like a traffic officer. "If you don't leave this instant, I'm calling the cops." The movers froze mid-step, a sofa balanced awkwardly in their hands. Their eyes darted between James and Karen, unsure of whose authority to follow. James raised a hand, signaling them to wait, then turned back to Karen. His voice was steady, but underneath it ran a current of frustration. "Please, step aside. You don't have the right to stop me from moving into my own home." Karen sneered, her lips curling as though James had personally insulted her. "We'll see about that," she snapped. With a dramatic flourish, she pulled out her phone and began to dial. James stood silently, his chest tight, as he listened to her voice carry into the air, sharp and accusing. "Yes, officer," she said, her tone dripping with false urgency. "There's a suspicious man here on Maple Drive. He's trying to break into a house that isn't his. I need you to come quickly." The words cut deep, not because James hadn't heard accusations like this before, but because they carried with them a heavy history of judgment, suspicion, and prejudice that no amount of accomplishment could erase. He had spent his entire life proving himself, rising above stereotypes, working harder than most, only to find himself here, on his very first day in his new home, being treated like a criminal. The movers shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. One finally asked, "Sir, should we keep unloading, or do we wait?" James swallowed hard and gave a small nod. "Keep unloading," he said quietly. "This is my home. We're not stopping." Across the street, blinds fluttered, as more neighbors peeked out, drawn by the escalating scene. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered behind cupped hands. A few, though silent, secretly hoped someone would finally stand up to Karen. For years she had tormented residents with petty fines, harsh letters, and endless rules. Now, as she strutted in the middle of the street, phone pressed to her ear, They watched with a mix of fear and anticipation. Karen smirked triumphantly, convinced she was saving the neighborhood from an intruder. James stood rooted in place, his heart pounding, not because he doubted his right to be there, but because he knew how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. What was supposed to be the happiest day of his life had already turned into a public spectacle, and as Karen barked into her phone, gesturing wildly at him, James could only take a deep breath, praying that reason and justice would win in the end. Karen paced the length of the sidewalk like a restless sentry, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice carried down the street, sharp and shrill, cutting through the calm of the Saturday morning. "Yes, officer," she said loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "There's a suspicious black man trying to break into a house. On Maple Drive? He doesn't belong here." Each word was laced with venom, the kind of entitlement that came from years of unchecked power within the homeowners association. She wasn't simply making a phone call. She was performing, staging her moment of authority for the entire neighborhood to see. Her words weren't just false. They were calculated to sting, to label James as an outsider, an invader, someone who had no right to stand on his own driveway. James, standing just a few feet away, heard every word. He closed his eyes briefly and exhaled, a long sigh heavy with the weight of experience. This wasn't the first time he had been misjudged, and deep down he knew it probably wouldn't be the last. But what cut him to the core was the timing. After years of saving, sacrificing, and dreaming, this was supposed to be his fresh start, a place where he could finally live in peace. Instead, before the first box was even carried inside, he was already being treated like a criminal in his own home. The sting wasn't just in the accusation, it was in the way. Karen's words so easily reduced his lifetime of achievement to nothing. He thought of the long hours he had spent working as a school principal, the late nights preparing lesson plans, the countless times he went above and beyond for his students. He remembered how he had always preached fairness, respect, and community, telling young people to rise above prejudice and pettiness. And now, here he was, facing the very thing he had fought against all his life, only this time, it was personal. The movers, sensing the tension, shifted uneasily. One man set down a box and approached James cautiously. "Sir," he asked, glancing nervously at Karen, "should we keep unloading? We don't want to make things worse if the police are coming." His question hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. The other movers stood frozen, watching James closely, waiting for his decision. James straightened his shoulders. Though his heart was pounding, his voice was calm. "Yes," he said firmly. "This is my home. We're not letting fear stop us." He gave a nod of reassurance, though inside he wrestled with frustration. He knew standing his ground was the right choice, but he also knew how dangerous misunderstandings could become when fueled by false accusations. Karen, meanwhile, was reveling in her sense of control. She walked back and forth with exaggerated purpose, making sure the neighbors could see her righteous display. She spoke loudly into the phone, enunciating each word, as if she were narrating a play. "Yes, officer, hurry. He's unloading things that don't belong to him. I think he's dangerous." Then, lowering her voice just enough to add a cruel edge, she muttered, "People like him always cause trouble." Her smirk grew wider as she ended the call. She tucked her phone under her arm like a trophy, confident she had just won the battle. "They'll be here any minute," she sneered, turning to James with an expression that mixed triumph and disdain. Her eyes sparkled with the arrogance of someone who believed she could twist the truth to her advantage. To Karen, the uniform and badge of the officers she had summoned were nothing more than tools for her personal vendetta, instruments she could manipulate to keep her version of order intact. James refused to give her the satisfaction of a response. Instead, he picked up a box himself, carrying it toward the house with slow, deliberate steps. Each movement was a statement he would not be intimidated, not today. Still, inside, his thoughts raced. He knew all too well how quickly situations like this could spiral. A single false report could snowball into a confrontation that might leave scars, or worse. He prayed silently for patience, for wisdom, and for the strength to endure whatever came next. The neighbors, though silent, were anything but passive. From behind curtains and blinds, they watched with rapt attention. Some whispered to spouses and children, pointing out the commotion on the street. Others shook their heads, their faces etched with quiet disapproval at Karen's behavior. A few pulled out their phones, not yet recording, but ready in case things escalated. There was an unspoken tension, an invisible line drawn between those who silently sided with James and those who were too afraid to challenge Karen outright. Karen basked in the attention, mistaking their silence for support. She crossed her arms and stood tall, her chin lifted high as though she were a general waiting for her troops to arrive. She believed she had already won. After all, she had called the authorities, and once the police arrived, surely they would take her side. That was how it had always been. In her mind, her word against anyone else's, and her word always prevailed. But what Karen didn't know was that fate had a sense of humor. And justice, when delayed, often arrives at the most unexpected moment. The flashing lights she eagerly awaited would not bring the validation she craved, but rather the reckoning she never saw coming. For now, she smirked, convinced victory was within reach, oblivious to the fact that the very call she made to tear James down would soon expose her for exactly what she was. And as James stood firm on his driveway, surrounded by half-unloaded boxes and wary movers, he had no idea that the story of this day was about to take a turn so sharp it would be retold by his neighbors for years to come. Minutes later, the low rumble of a police car echoed down Maple Drive. Its flashing lights washed over the houses in rhythmic bursts of red and blue, turning the quiet suburban street into a stage. Karen's eyes lit up with smug satisfaction. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the triumph she had carefully orchestrated. She smoothed her blouse, lifted her chin, and strutted toward the curb like a queen about to receive her loyal knights. In her mind, the story was already written. She would be hailed as the vigilant protector who saved her neighborhood from an intruder. She imagined whispers of gratitude from neighbors, perhaps even a mention at the next HOA meeting about her bravery. James, standing by his moving truck with a box still in his hands, braced himself. His stomach tightened as the cruiser rolled to a stop. He had lived long enough to know that these situations could go in unpredictable directions. He prayed silently that reason would prevail, but his heart still beat heavily in his chest. For a man who had dedicated his life to teaching children patience and integrity, it was a cruel irony that he now stood accused of wrongdoing, before his own belongings were even through the front door. Karen's grin widened as the officer stepped out. She pointed theatrically toward James as though presenting undeniable evidence. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she cried, her voice laced with drama, her body language exaggerated for maximum effect. She didn't wait for the officer to ask questions. Instead, she jabbed her finger toward James, her sunglasses slipping slightly down her nose in her rush to condemn him. "That man is trespassing. He doesn't live here. Arrest him immediately." Her voice rose with each word, as if sheer volume could cement her authority. But then the unexpected happened. The officer, tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet confidence that commanded respect, removed his sunglasses and looked directly at the man Karen was pointing to. In that instant, recognition sparked in his eyes. It wasn't just any officer. It was Marcus James's son. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The movers froze mid-step. Neighbors gasped quietly from behind their curtains. And even the breeze through the trees seemed to pause. Karen's confident smile faltered as she processed what she was seeing. Her jaw dropped, her hand lingering. In midair, as though still clinging to the accusation she had just hurled, Marcus took a few deliberate steps forward, his boots firm against the pavement. His gaze shifted from his father to Karen, his expression unreadable, but his posture radiating authority. "The man you're talking about," he said slowly, his tone calm but edged with steel, "is my father." The words hung heavy in the air, sinking into the ears of every witness. For the first time in years, Karen found herself speechless. Her lips parted, then closed again, searching for a response that wouldn't come. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the idling police car. From nearby houses, doors creaked open. Neighbors stepped onto their porches, drawn by curiosity and the unmistakable electricity of the confrontation. They leaned on railings, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. Some shook their heads knowingly, while others exchanged glances as if to say, "Finally, justice has arrived." Karen blinked rapidly, her brain scrambling for damage control. Oh, I must have made a mistake," she stammered, her voice suddenly smaller, stripped of its earlier confidence. She forced a laugh that sounded more like a choke. "He didn't tell me he was moving in. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." Bet Marcus wasn't fooled, and neither were the neighbors who had heard Karen's earlier accusations. His jaw tightened as he straightened his shoulders, speaking with the authority that came not only from his badge but from the truth. "No, ma'am," he said firmly. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a false police report." Karen's face flushed crimson, her composure unraveling. She glanced desperately at the gathering crowd, searching for a sympathetic face, but none came. The very neighbors she had bullied for years with her endless HOA rules were now witnesses to her undoing. Her performance, once convincing in her own mind, now rang hollow under the weight of reality. James, standing beside his truck, felt a wave of relief wash over him. The tightness in his chest eased slightly as he looked at his son, his protector, his pride, his living reminder that perseverance and integrity could overcome even the darkest of trials. Marcus wasn't just defending him as a police officer, he was defending him as family. That realization filled James with quiet pride, even amid the chaos. Karen, however, wasn't ready to concede. "This is all just a misunderstanding," she insisted, her words tumbling over one another. I thought he was breaking in. You can't blame me for being cautious." But her excuses sounded flimsy, paper-thin in the heavy silence. Marcus's eyes narrowed. His voice cut through her excuses like a blade. "You didn't call in a misunderstanding. You called in a lie. You described my father as a threat. You tried to weaponize the police against him. That's not caution. That's prejudice. And it's dangerous." Gasps rippled through the small crowd of neighbors. Several raised their phones, recording now, capturing every word. Karen's authority, the image she had carefully cultivated for years, crumbled with each passing second. For James, the moment was bittersweet. He had been humiliated, his dignity questioned, his character maligned. But watching his son stand, tall, confronting injustice head-on, he realized something powerful. Karen's smear had failed. Instead of tearing him down, she had exposed herself, and in doing so, she had given the neighborhood a front-row seat to the truth. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant hum of the cruiser's engine. Karen finally lowered her gaze. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, she had no words left.